Why fit and healthy people still get heart attacks. Here's something that'll mess with your head. You could be hitting the gym every day, eating clean, and walking out of your annual checkup with a thumbs up from your doctor, and still be quietly heading toward a heart attack. That's not fear-mongering. That's just what the data shows. The standard yearly checkup, it's pretty much looking in the wrong places. You can have totally normal cholesterol, feel absolutely fine, and still have plaque building up in your arteries right now. So let's actually talk about what's really going on under the hood, the stuff routine blood work isn't catching, and the specific tests you should be asking for. And yeah, quick disclaimer, I'm not your doctor. Talk to yours before changing anything. This is just education. Inflammation, the silent killer nobody talks about enough. Okay, let's kick this off with what I think is the most underestimated problem in heart health, and that's inflammation. Here's the thing people don't realize. You can have perfectly controlled cholesterol and still be at serious risk if your inflammation is out of control. Managing cholesterol alone isn't enough. Full stop. The study that really drove this home is called the CANTOS trial. Researchers took over 10,000 patients who already had heart disease. Their LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, was already reasonably well managed, sitting at a median of 82 mg/dl. Cholesterol wasn't really the problem for most of them, but their inflammation? Still elevated. So the researchers asked a simple question. What happens if we just lower the inflammation and don't touch cholesterol at all? They gave one group a drug that specifically targets an inflammatory pathway, zero effect on cholesterol. And just by bringing inflammation down, major cardiovascular events dropped by 15%. In the patients who got their high sensitivity CRP below 2, it was even better. 25% fewer major events, and a 31% drop in death from any cause. A bigger follow-up analysis of over 31,000 patients on statins confirmed it. Even with treated LDL, people with high inflammation still had double the cardiovascular death risk compared to people with low inflammation. Now, this doesn't mean ignore your LDL. LDL still causes plaque, but cholesterol and inflammation are two separate problems. You've got to deal with both. The American College of Cardiology actually put out a statement saying exactly that. High sensitivity CRP predicts cardiovascular risk as well as, and sometimes better than, standard cholesterol numbers. This is a huge reason why seemingly healthy people get heart attacks. Their inflammation is just flying under the radar. Here's how I handle it with my patients. We always check and track high sensitivity CRP. If it's elevated, we dig for the root cause because it's usually something fixable. Excess belly fat, insulin resistance, bad sleep, chronic stress, even untreated dental issues. Fix the root cause, inflammation drops, and your risk drops with it. Your LDL number is probably lying to you. Now back to cholesterol, because there's a bigger problem with how most people get tested. Standard panels check LDL-C. It's okay, but it doesn't tell the whole story. This is exactly why you can have a normal LDL and still be at high risk. What you actually want to know is your ApoB, apolipoprotein B. That number gives you a much more accurate picture of risk. Here's why. LDL is just one type of particle-carrying cholesterol through your blood. But there's also VLDL and IDL, and both of those also drive plaque formation. So you could have normal LDL, but still have a ton of these other dangerous particles floating around. ApoB cuts through all of that. Every single one of those atherogenic particles, LDL, IDL, VLDL, has exactly one ApoB molecule on it. So when you measure ApoB, you're counting all the dangerous particles at once. It's the full picture. For most people, LDL and ApoB move together. High LDL usually means high ApoB and vice versa, but not always, and this is where people get into serious trouble. The two numbers diverge when you have insulin resistance. That includes prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, PCOS, and even high blood pressure. And insulin resistance is everywhere right now. Estimates suggest up to 40% of non-diabetic Americans have it. If you're in that group, tracking only LDL is leaving a massive blind spot. Once you know your ApoB, the next question is, what should it actually be? And here's where most doctors and patients are thinking too short term. Standard risk calculators look at the next 10 years. If your 10-year risk is low, you're told everything's fine. Come back next year. But atherosclerosis, plaque buildup, doesn't develop in 10 years. It starts in your teens, quietly piles up for decades, and then finally triggers a heart attack in your 60s or 70s. By the time a 10-year calculator starts flashing warnings, plaque has already been building for 30 to 40 years. Think about it like driving full speed toward a cliff and only hitting the brakes when you can already see the edge. You've already run out of road. Instead, I think about the next 30 to 40 years. With my patients, for that time horizon, the goal is to get ApoB below the 5th percentile. roughly below 60 milligrams/dl. If ApoB isn't available, and we're relying on LDL, I aim for below 60 to 70, which is the threshold where research shows plaque starts accumulating. That might sound aggressive compared to what you're used to hearing, but when you're playing the long game, the math changes completely. The genetic risk factor 1 in 5 people have and don't know about. ApoB still isn't the full story. There's a genetic marker that roughly 20% of people carry, and it can double or even triple your heart attack risk. It doesn't show up on standard panels. It's called lipoprotein A, or LPA. Elevated LPA is probably one of the most common reasons you see apparently healthy people in their 40s have heart attacks out of nowhere. What makes it especially sneaky is that it's almost entirely genetic. Diet and exercise barely touch it. Most people don't know they have it until something serious happens. Structurally, LPA looks like LDL, but it has an extra protein wrapped around it that makes it far more aggressive. It speeds up plaque formation, makes existing plaques more likely to rupture and clot, and over time it can drive calcium buildup on the aortic valve, a condition called aortic stenosis, where the valve becomes stiff and narrow, eventually leading to heart failure. Because of all this, the American Heart Association and other major guidelines now say every adult should get their LPA checked at least once in their lifetime. Since it's genetic, it stays stable. You only need to test it once. If yours comes back elevated, there's no FDA-approved treatment yet, but several therapies are in phase 3 trials right now, and the data looks promising. In the meantime, the strategy is to aggressively lower every other cardiovascular risk you can control. Push ApoB as low as possible, keep blood pressure tight, tackle insulin resistance, and reduce inflammation. Insulin resistance, probably the biggest root cause nobody's talking about. This brings us to arguably the most common underlying driver I see in people who look totally healthy on paper: insulin resistance. Simply put, it's when your body struggles to manage blood sugar properly. It shows up as fatty liver, high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, eventually type 2 diabetes, PCOS, and high triglycerides. We already covered how it skews your LDL versus ApoB readings, but insulin resistance is also an independent heart disease risk factor on its own. And it might actually be a bigger driver than cholesterol. In the Quebec cardiovascular study, people with high insulin levels, which is what you see with insulin resistance, had more than 5 times the risk of heart disease. 5 times. That was a bigger risk factor than high LDL or high ApoB. And critically, men with normal cholesterol but high insulin still had elevated heart disease risk. Here's what makes it so easy to miss. Your fasting blood sugar, and A1C, can look completely normal even when your insulin resistance is already significant. Your pancreas is just quietly working 3 or 4 times harder than it should to keep those numbers in range. Normal blood sugar through brute force compensation isn't health. It's your body burning itself out. To catch this early, ask your doctor for a fasting insulin level alongside your glucose and A1C. If your insulin is elevated while glucose is still normal, your pancreas is already in overdrive, and you want to catch that before it becomes a bigger problem. The good news is insulin resistance is reversible, especially early on. And when you fix it, almost everything else improves at the same time. ApoB drops, triglycerides improve, blood pressure comes down, inflammation normalizes. It's one fix that moves a ton of dials. The main levers: reduce visceral fat, do both aerobic and resistance training regularly, cut refined carbs and ultra-processed food. For a lot of my patients, those changes alone produce dramatic improvements within a few months. One more thing, you need imaging too. Everything I just covered, ApoB, LP, APA, fasting insulin, high sensitivity CRP, these are blood markers. They tell you how favorable or unfavorable your biology is for plaque formation, but they don't tell you whether plaque is already there. For that, you need imaging. Tools like coronary artery calcium scoring, CAC, coronary CT angiography, and carotid intima media thickness, ultrasound, each give you a different window into what's actually happening in your arteries. I'm putting together a dedicated video on exactly which imaging test to get and when. So subscribe so you don't miss it. Stay on top of this stuff. The whole point is catching it before it catches you.